Joining us with more on this right now is Senator Mark Warner. He's the chairman of the Select Committee on Intelligence. And Senator Warner, where do things stand right now? We hear so much back and forth with the Russians claiming that they are de-escalating, but we haven't seen much sign of it yet. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, that's my fear, that you've got Russian disinformation happening again. They may be moving some units around, but at the macro level, we've not seen any major signs of de-escalation. Now, on the good news front, I think we're seeing NATO united. We're seeing Western leaders, it was just the German chancellor, show up in Kyiv and Moscow on an almost daily basis. We've seen these images of Ukrainians on the weekends training for insurgency if the Russians invade. And the intelligence community, both ours and the Brits, are laying out information almost as soon as we get it. So a few weeks back, it was saying if there's a coup coming in Ukraine, it's fomented by Russia. If a video appears, it may be fomented by Russia. The National Security Advisor laying out that Russians could actually be acting any day. We may have gained a few days now, but unfortunately no serious indications that the Russians are de-escalating. Let's not believe what Putin says. Let's see what he actually does.
The talk was of de-escalation. We also heard reports of Ukrainian banks being subject to cyber attacks in other areas. Can we assume that the Russians did that?
Listen, we're still dealing with the actual attribution, but the timing of an attack on some of the Ukrainian government entities, Ukrainian banks, and this is my real concern. We've never seen an all-out cyber war. Some of you may remember back in 2017 when the Russians launched an attack on Ukrainian infrastructure, cyber attack called NotPetya. That didn't stay within the borders of Ukraine. That literally cost billions of dollars to Western businesses, American businesses. And what I'm afraid of in the short term, because you probably will see an upsurge of cyber attacks before a kinetic attack, would be that Russians try to launch an attack shutting down Ukrainian critical infrastructure. Well, what happens if that critical infrastructure shuts down in Poland as well? Some of these hypotheticals about what would constitute an Article 5 violation, that's an attack on one country in NATO, means all countries in NATO are attacked. You know, we've always left a little gray on what level of cyber attack would constitute that. But we may move soon, unfortunately, from the theoretical to the real in these kind of instances.
Well, that's what it feels like. I mean, when you have President Biden coming up with some pretty tough talk, saying if you cross over, if any tanks cross over, if you cross across the border, there will be very strict repercussions. But nothing that's been said. It feels like Putin is almost trying to maneuver and use the language to say, okay, we didn't send troops across the border. We're going to do this cyber attack. Why haven't we heard the same sort of pronouncements when it comes to cyber attacks?
Well, again, cyber, there's gradations. I mean, there is a low-level Russian cyber attacks on a regular basis. I mean, we've seen and identified and attributed, Russian cyber attacks against our country in a variety of ways. I mean, we still think back about the SolarWinds incident a couple years ago. That was probably Russian generated. So this is that gray area. I think all American businesses ought to make sure that they are checking out their cyber defenses, because we all know these networks are intertwined. So you hit a network in Ukraine, it can end up having reverberations elsewhere around Europe and around the world. But we should in no way underestimate. I mean, I heard your earlier guest, Arthur Brooks, who's a great, great guy, but we are entering in one of the most dangerous weeks, I think, almost post-World War II in terms of the natural boundaries that have been set around Europe.
And your concern is not so much a ground war, but the cyber war, or your concern is that we could have either at this point?
My concern is both. My concern is both. As a matter of fact, if there is a ground incursion, it's almost assured that that will be preceded by a cyber attack, and probably much greater than what we've seen in the last 24 hours, where it seems like the cyber attack was dedicated just to a few government agencies and Ukrainian government agencies and Ukrainian banks. My concern is one of the most powerful tools against the Russians will be the Ukrainian people filming Russian aggression. And my concern is what happens if the Russians go in and try to shut down the internet, try to shut down the networks. That is something also that we'll look to as a sign of more to come.